Good afternoon, friends. I'm Saeed Waqar Raza. Munsa, thanks for the generous introduction that you have given. Friends, today I'm going to share my views about the Northeast insurgency and the whole scenario in the Northeast. I must at the outset tell that these are my views and it doesn't reflect the views of Government of India or the Government of West Bengal. More so, my intention in this lecture is not to criticize any government policy, but only to help you understand the insurgency and the background in the Northeast. So friends, in this video lecture, I'm going to discuss about the entire scenario in the Northeast. It will include the causes of underdevelopment in the Northeast, as well as the insurgency, how it originated and where it stands as of now. Friends, in this lecture, I will cover briefly about the geography and history of Northeast, about several states, Assam, Nagaland, each of the insurgencies in these states. I'll also go on to Manipur, other states like Tripura and Mizoram, and so on. Then I will discuss a little bit about inner line permit. I will discuss about the cause of insurgency in the Northeast. Once you have understood each of these states and the situation there, then I will go on to the cause of insurgency in the Northeast. I'll also discuss about the cause of underdevelopment in the Northeast and why it is very challenging to address insurgency in the Northeast. Then I will move on to the constitutional provisions of the for development. I will also briefly discuss about the appraisal of these constitutional provisions, how whether they have been successful or not. I'll discuss the government efforts for development of Northeast. I'll also discuss about the appraisal of the government efforts. I'll then go on to some of the suggestions which you can write in the examination. I'll also discuss about a burning topic, which is AFSPA and its origin, its where it stands now. And then I will conclude by some recent issues like these Kabi Anglong, Assam Mizoram border dispute, and so on. And I'll lastly discuss about the Assam Mizoram border dispute and then some previous year's questions from Northeast in UPSC mains examination. And then I will sum up the whole class. So friends, as you have seen, it is quite a packed lecture. So it will take me almost about 1 to 1.5 hours. I just request your patience because I know it will be sometimes just after the lunch session. It will be slightly boring, and so, but you have to bear with that. And I hope that after attending this lecture, you will be able to understand Northeast in a better perspective. And my aim for this lecture is to help you solve any question in the examination based on Northeast. So that is my personal aim. If I'm able to help you in that, I think my lecture will be successful. So friends, coming to the first state, Northeast, friends, it comprises of 8 states. So there are 7 sisters: Assam, Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur, Mizoram, Meghalaya, Tripura, and then also Sikkim. So there are 8 states in the Northeast. 8% of India's area is covered, and 4% of the population. 99% of its borders of the Northeast is international. It borders Bhutan here, and then China, Bhutan, Myanmar, and then Nepal on this side, and then here is Bangladesh. So there are 5 countries bordering Northeast, and 99% of the area's borders are international. Only 1% of the area's border is with the Indian mainland, and that is called the Chicken's Neck or the Siliguri corridor. It's a very narrow strip somewhere here, and at the widest point, the narrowest point is only about 22 kilometers wide. So you see the connection with this mainland is only very narrow, and sometimes it results in disturbance in this area will have a cascading effect on the entire of the Northeast. Also, it's a very critical area at this point, because if this point is cut off, this entire Northeast will be cut off, and this poses a strategic challenge for India, because China has already this place is Doklam, and so they're quite near to this place. So this is also a strategically challenging situation here in the Chicken's corridor. The terrain is difficult, friends. It is hilly and forested, as you can see in this map. You see these are all hills, and this is the Brahmaputra Valley, Assam Valley, and entire Northeast except for this Tripura and some of this part it is very hilly and forested and interspersed by rivers and streams. So it's a difficult terrain. A little bit about the history, friends. Initially, when the British captured Northeast, it was a part of Bengal. Later, it became a part. They renamed it as Northeast Frontiers, and it became a part of the Assam province of the British. Majority of the people living in this region were tribals. Gradually, the British annexed these regions and expanded, but they followed a policy of non-interference without disturbing their own cultures and customs. They used to loosely administer the place. So this loose administration and the policy of exclusion of outsiders, they made an ILP which did not allow the outsiders to go into these areas without their permission. So that was basically to, as you will see in the ILP slide, that was basically to protect their own commercial interests. But then this policy of excluding outsiders and loose governance, and this all resulted in a lack of strong linkage with the central power, and that has somehow resulted in the feeling of alienation of the Northeast. Post independence, there were only the states of Assam, Manipur and Tripura. These Manipur and Tripura were princely states. Assam comprised of Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, Nagaland, Mizoram, and Meghalaya. So later, after in 1972, in the reorganization of states, these all states got created at various points of time. But initially, it was Assam, Manipur, and Tripura only. So now, friends, and this whole region is currently undergoing a period of turmoil or underdevelopment and insurgency. It's a vicious cycle. Insurgency leads to underdevelopment, and underdevelopment also leads to insurgency. Having this background, friends, now we move to the first state in the Northeast, Assam. Assam is the biggest state of the Northeast. This is the map, and you see in Assam, friends, the first insurgency was by the Assamese people, or rather the ULFA, or rather the All Assam States Union. They wanted the outside. After this partition of after the creation of Bangladesh, or even before that, a lot of people from Bangladesh had migrated into Assam, and it had resulted in the change of demographic profile of Assam itself. So the people there, there was competition for resource, there was competition for land, and there was pressure for land, and so on. So people there, led by the All Assam Students Union, they protested against this, and there was a Assam movement, 1979. And there was a violent Assam movement led by the ULFA at that time, and it resulted in an accord which was signed between the Prime Minister of India, then Rajiv Gandhi, and the ULFA, and the Assam State, the All Assam Students Union, and the state government. And the accord basically it had two important clauses apart from other things. There are two important dates, that is 1st of January 1966 and 24th of March 1971. So all the people who had come to Assam before this first date, 1/1/1966, they were to be retained as they were to be treated as residents of Assam itself. But those people who had come after the second date, 1971, they were to be detected, they were to be deported from India, and their names were to be removed from the voters list. Those people who had come in between this period, they were to stay in Assam, but they would have got the voting rights only after 10 years period from this date. Friends, there is another clause, clause 6, which provide for safeguard for the Assamese people, and so that those peoples who had come up to 1966 or even up to 1971, they would be part of Assam. But then this safeguard was for those people who were there even prior to the outsiders coming from, say, Bangladesh or other places. So the cutoff date for this was fixed by recently a committee under Justice B.K. Sharma, and the cutoff date is 1951. That means people who were residents of Assam before 1951, they were to be treated as the original Assamese people, and they would get the benefits, certain benefits for preservation of their culture, certain benefits in reservation, and so on. So that is the Assam movement. At present, there is the ULFA is still active. ULFA Independent is still there in Assam. So it sometimes it sometimes resorts to violence in the areas under its control or domination. The second, now we move to the second insurgency. This is the Bodo insurgency, friends. Bodo insurgency. Bodos are the biggest tribal community of Assam. They comprise of 6% of the population of Assam, and they are mainly in this area, that is on the northern banks of Brahmaputra, right? This part is Bhutan, and it is just below those 4 districts, which is Kokrajhar, Chirang, Baksa, and Udalguri. So these 4 districts are they have a significant population of Bodos, and it is this place where the Bodo insurgency is most active. Their demand is basically for a separate state called Bodoland, and they want Assam to be divided 50-50. And initially, this Bodoland agitation was started by all Bodo Students Union and BPSC. These two were political parties for pressing for the demand of Bodoland. So there were 3 accords in Bodo insurgency. The government of India signed 3 accords. So the first one was in 1993. It led to the formation of an Bodoland Autonomous Council, and this gave autonomy and limited political power to the Bodos. But the problem, and there were 40 seats in the Bodoland Autonomous Council, but the problem was that the non-Bodos objected. The non-Bodos in this area, they objected to this accord, and also the NDFB they felt that the provisions were inadequate to meet the political aspirations. They wanted rather a separate country for the Bodos. So NDFB rejected this accord, and also the non-Bodos also did not like the accord. So still the insurgency continued, and in 2003 the second agreement was signed, which converted this Bodoland Autonomous Council to Bodoland Territorial Council. And this Bodoland Territorial Council was brought under the 6th schedule of the Constitution of India. And this agreement was signed between the government of Assam, government of India, and the Bodo Liberation Tigers. So this was another insurgent group at that time, and they signed an agreement. After this group disbanded. But again, the NDFB continued to protest against this thing, and they were not satisfied with the mere creation of 6th schedule BTC, but they also wanted this whole area to be independent. And also the accord was opposed by those people in this area who were non-Bodos, because the non-Bodos are in a majority. Bodos are only 30% of the population of this area, but the non-Bodos are in a majority, and this accord had no provisions for them. So the accord was also disliked by them, and moreover, it skewed the power in favor of the Bodos in this area. So the non-Bodos, who were almost 70% of population in this area, they felt like they did not accept the accord. The latest accord was of January 2020, very recently, friends. And in January 2020, 4 factions of NDFB. NDFB again split into many factions. The 4 important factions signed an agreement along with these 2 parties, ABSU and UBPO, and with the government of India and the government of Assam. And they were given a political and economic package, but no division of Assam was allowed. So Assam would remain as one state, but the Bodo people living here or elsewhere, they would be given certain privileges and facilities. And what are those facilities? This is the capacity. This Bodoland Territorial Council was to be renamed as Bodoland Territorial Region. The number of seats was to be increased from 40 to 60. There was to be a commission formed which would decide on the non-Bodos who were to live in this area. The non-Bodos majority, suppose in these bordering areas, there were non-Bodos, and those villages in which there were more than 50% of non-Bodos, that was to be excluded from this area and from the Bodo BTR area, and those areas those outside areas or adjoining areas which had more than 50% Bodos, they were to be included in the BTC area. So to determine these areas, a commission was set up. Then again, Bodo language was to be made the associate official language of Assam. Bodo language with Devanagari script was to be made the associate official language of the entire of Assam. And then a Bodo Kachari Welfare Council was to be formed, which would take care of the interests of the Bodos outside this Bodo BTR area. So Bodos are living here in different places. So for those, the Bodo Kachari Welfare Council was to be formed. And the Bodos outside this area, namely like in Karbi Anglong and so on, they were to be given Scheduled Hill Tribe status. Moreover, 1,500 NDFB cadres surrendered in March 2020. So they were to be rehabilitated, and a 1,500 crore package for 3 years was to be given for the development of this area. Also, this BTR this had jurisdiction over 40 subjects, like land, law and order, local governance, and so on. So 8 more subjects were added, such as like renewable energy, small dams, micro hydroelectric power, rural electrification, and so on. So 8 additional subjects were also given in this in the ambit of the BTR. Also, for these 1,500 surrendered NDFB cadres, a compensation of ₹5 lakhs was to be given. Cases were to be withdrawn from them, and this was the overall package. But the concerns were that the non-Bodos again did not like this package. Moreover, the Scheduled Hill Tribe status, which was given to the non-Bodos outside, like in these regions, the other tribes which had Scheduled Hill Tribe status, for example, the Karbis, they have objected to the inclusion of other tribes in this, other tribes like the Bodos as Scheduled Hill Tribes. Moreover, this additional subject that has been given to the BSc, these 8 additional subjects, there are other autonomous councils also in Assam, like Karbi Anglong, like Dimasa, and so on. The Karbi Anglong, the Dima Hasao, and so on. So they only have the jurisdiction of 40 subjects. So they may also want later to, their demand might be to increase their number of subjects also to 48 or more. So these are the concerns that, friends, this recent Bodo agreement has posed. But nevertheless, it's a welcome step in the long run insurgency of Bodoland, and we hope that this agreement will bring lasting peace to the Bodo inhabited areas in Assam. The last one, friends, is Kamtapur Liberation Organization, KLO. KLO is basically active in the western part of Assam, and also it borders some of the districts of northern Bengal. So this region is where the Kamtapuri people, Rajbangshis, they live, and their demand is for a separate nation. So KLO also has linkages with other groups like ULFA, NSC, NIM, and so on. So the KLO is a banned organization under the UAPA. But KLO at present is not very active. It is sometimes involved in bomb blasts and so on in this region or in this region of West Bengal, the northern regions of West Bengal. Friends, now we move to the last part. We have already studied 3 insurgencies. ULFA we have studied, the Bodos we have studied, KLOs we have a little bit studied, and now we move on to the Karbi Anglong part. Karbi Anglong is this part of the state, friends. Karbi Anglong is these two areas comprise of Karbi Anglong. This is now, earlier it was the biggest district of Assam. Now these 2 areas have been divided into 2 parts. This is Dima Hasao, a separate district. So this is Karbi Anglong East and this is Karbi Anglong West. So earlier it was the biggest district. Now of course it has been divided in 2 parts. It is one of the most, or rather it is one of the most poorest districts of Assam. There are many tribes in Karbi Anglong. Karbis, Nagas, Rengma Nagas, Kukis, Dimasas, and so on. So it's a melting pot of various tribes and communities in Assam. And Karbis are the most dominant. They comprise of 45% of the population. And this is Karbi Anglong is an autonomous council under the 6th schedule. So that is called Karbi Anglong Autonomous Council. Their demand is for a separate state of Karbi Anglong and North Kachar Hills, and these are the 2 main organizations like Karbi Longri National Liberation Front and Karbi People's Liberation Tigers, and often they're involved in clashes. They are the ones who are spearheading the demand for a separate state of Karbi state in this region of Assam. Kukis also are there in this region, and Rengma Nagas are also there. So they are fighting with them for protecting their own rights. And Dimasa Halam Dauga, this is a tribe which lives in this region, and it is also fighting for a state of the Dimasa. So all these tribes are fighting with the government for their state or autonomous council, and also amongst themselves to protect their own interests. Recently, in September 2021, an agreement was signed very recently, say 2 months or 3 months ago, in which it was a tripartite agreement between 5 insurgent groups. These are KL, NLF, PDCK, UPLA, KPLT, KLF. I'm not going for the full forms. These are all Karbi insurgent groups, except for this one, which is one of them. This one is Kuki Liberation Front. So one is a Kuki group, and rest 4 are Karbi groups. So these groups, along with Assam government and central government, have signed an agreement very recently, 2-3 months ago. And the agreement has rather earlier in February 2021, 1,000 cadres, or rather 1,040 cadres of these groups had surrendered to the government before the government of India and the government of Assam, and they had surrendered with weapons. So that was in February, and in September this agreement was signed, and the agreement provided for the rehabilitation of the 1,000 surrendered cadres. It also gave a package of almost 1,000 crores for 5 years for the development of these Karbi areas. And it has provided for greater autonomy to the Karbi Anglong Autonomous Council by giving them more executive, legislative, administrative, and financial powers. As I have told, this falls under the 6th schedule, so their powers have been enhanced. Also, the accord provides for supplementing the consolidated fund of Assam and augmenting the resources of KAC. There is this Karbi Welfare Council for those Karbis who live outside this area. So for their who live outside the KAC area, so for them a Karbi Welfare Council has been formed, and the accord provides for the protection of identity, language, culture, etc. of the Karbis. But despite these, no division of Assam will take place. That is what the accord says, and so Assam, the state stays intact. So friends, we have read the Karbi Anglong recent agreement, and hopefully this agreement will bring lasting peace to this region as well. So this region agreement has been done. This region agreement has been done. The only significant group which remains in Assam is ULFA Independent, led by Mr. Paresh Barua, who is probably hiding in somewhere on the China-Myanmar border in a place called Ruili. Now, friends, we move on to Nagaland. Nagaland, we'll just briefly discuss the history of Nagaland. Nagaland is it was earlier it was never annexed, it was never ruled by any outsider. It was the first time in 1826 that the British annexed Assam, that they then moved towards Nagaland. And to protect, so gradually the British started expanding towards Nagaland, but they were careful not to disturb the local culture, traditions, and so on. It was, they were loosely administering the area. But in 1945, a Naga Hill District Tribal Council was formed, whose aim was to gather all to bring all the Nagas. Nagas are not one tribe; they are a community, and there are various tribes, various Naga like Semas, like Angami Nagas, and so on. There are so Rengma Nagas. There are so many Naga tribes. So to bring all those tribes on one platform, the Naga Hill District Tribal Council was formed. And in 1946, the Naga National Council was formed, again with the same aim of taking care of the interests of all the Naga tribes. And in February 1947, a memo was given to Lord Mountbatten to requesting him that India act as the guardian power of the Nagas for 10 years after independence. And after that, they requested to be given the freedom to choose their course of action, or choose their political future. I'll also mention briefly about 9-point agreement, friends. 9-point agreement, also called the Akbar Haidari agreement. Akbar Haidari was the governor of Assam at that time. So it was signed between him and two leaders of NNC. The main leader was Fizo, but two other leaders who signed the agreement. There were several clauses, mainly the right of Nagas to develop themselves, or to develop according to their own culture and customs, was given. But the sticking point was clause 9. Clause 9 again said that for 10 years, India would act as a guardian power, and the governor of Nagaland would act as the representative of the government of India. And after 10 years, the Nagas would have the freedom to either continue with the same agreement or to go for a fresh agreement. Now, friends, here the Nagas interpreted that a fresh agreement means they had the right to not go for any agreement, and they had the right to secede. Whereas the government of India, or rather the then government, their perception was that they could only change the contents of the agreement but not go for secession. So this is the root cause of the insurgency. But I must add here that the Constituent Assembly in 1949, they rejected the 9-point agreement. They did not agree to the 9-point agreement. But just to tell you briefly the background I have mentioned. So the Naga National Council under Fizo, it declared independence on 14th of August 1947. And they declared a sovereign Naga state just after the independence. And there was a referendum which was held by the so-called referendum which was held by the NNC in 1951, in which 99% of the Nagas, as per the NNC, they voted for creation of a separate nation. So Nagas, the Fizo started an underground Naga federal government, and a Naga federal army was launched in 1952. And a series of violent incidents had taken place. So to counter that, the Indian Army was called in 1956, and to strengthen the hands of the Indian Army, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act 1957 was enacted. So Fizo escaped later to London, and the insurgency was by and large brought under control at that time, temporarily. In 1965, a 16-point agreement was signed with the Naga NNC in 1960. And in this 16-point agreement, the main thing was that Nagaland would be a state with special safeguards, but it would be brought under the Ministry of External Affairs. There were other features also, but I'm not going into the details of the 16-point agreement. In 1962-63, the Nagaland state was formed. Then, friends, coming to the in 1975, a Shillong Accord was signed by the NNC and the government. The Shillong Accord mentioned that the demand of Nagas or the NNC and the other groups is that this is the area of Nagaland. This small area is about 16,500 kilometers square, but Nagas live here, and all of these areas. So their demand is to integrate all of these areas and call it a Greater Nagalim, or rather Greater Nagaland or Nagalim, and they want to integrate all these areas and make it as one separate nation. So that is the integration of all Naga inhabited areas is their demand, but the demand is obviously being objected by all the states, these surrounding states like Assam, Manipur, Arunachal Pradesh, and of course even a part of Myanmar. They are claiming to be a part of the Greater Nagaland. So that is the demand. And so Shillong Accord, in the Shillong Accord, they decided that they will drop this, and there will be special safeguards for Nagaland, like there is special safeguards, but it will be again within the constitutional parameters of India. So this Shillong Accord, after the Shillong Accord, NNC was a splinter group from NNC, which was against this accord. It started, and that was how the NSCN was born. NSCN was born in 1980, just after 5 years after this Shillong Accord. In Shillong Accord was within the constitutional parameters of India, but the NSCN were against this, so they formed a separate group in 1980, and their main demand, and it was formed at that time by Isaac Muiva, and one person called Khaplang. So these three persons, they formed the NSCN in 1980, and their main demand, as I have told, was creation of a greater Nagaland or Nagalim. And even the Nagaland Assembly has currently, or rather 5 times in the past, it has ratified the demand for integration of the Naga inhabited areas, though it has not pressed for any separate country as such, but the integration of those Naga inhabited areas has been passed by the Assembly of Nagaland for 5 times in the previous years. Friends, in 1988, the NSCN Isaac Muiva and the NSCN Khaplang, they had a split, on certain grounds, and NSCN Isaac Muiva signed a ceasefire agreement with the government of India in 1997. There were a series of talks with even up to the Prime Minister level before that, and in 1997 they agreed for they signed a ceasefire with the government of India. The NSCN followed suit, NSCN Khaplang followed suit, and they signed a ceasefire agreement in 1998. However, in 2015, the NSCN Khaplang faction, it launched an attack or ambush on the army personnel in the northeast, I think in Manipur, and after which they were banned under the UAPA. And at present, also the NSCN Khaplang is a banned faction under the UAPA, banned group under the UAPA. So at present, the NSCN IM is in talks with the government of India. I'll come to the agreements or to the framework agreement later, but NSCN Khaplang is one group which is still indulging in violence and is not in talks with the government of India. It is not in suspension of operation with the government of India. Other major factions like NSCN IM, NSCN, there are other reformation, there are other factions like NSCN Konyak. So all these factions are under ceasefire with the government of India, except the NSCN Khaplang faction. Even when they are under ceasefire with the government of India, they are indulging in a parallel in areas under their control. They are levying taxes or indulging in parallel governance, holding kangaroo courts, and indulging extortion, and so on. So they are using this opportunity of ceasefire to sometimes indulge in extortion, sometimes for training, and so on. Recently, friends, the Indian government has signed an agreement in 2015 called the Framework Agreement with the Nagas. And this framework agreement respects the Naga aspiration. This is a term that I have taken from the agreement itself. It respects the Naga aspiration of their uniqueness, of their unique history and their uniqueness. The government of India respects this Naga aspiration. And also this term is their sovereignty lies with the people. So actually, the terms of the agreement were not made public initially, but in 2020, last year, when the talks were having hiccups, so the Naga NSCN IM, it released they said that it released their version or their copy of the agreement, and some things like sovereignty lies with the people, and they also mentioned about the shared sovereignty, which the NSCN IM says that the document mentions about shared sovereignty. And it also says that the document contains new relationship of peaceful coexistence. So they allege that the word "new" has been removed from the agreement by the then governor of Nagaland, Mr. K.N. Ravi, and so they had a bitter relation with Mr. K.N. Ravi. And so at present, the dialogue is in a rather it's the speed breaker has hit it. They have alleged that the government of India said that it's a relationship of peaceful coexistence. But they think that the Naga interpretation or the NSCN IM interpretation is that it's a new relationship in which they will share the sovereignty with the people of India. Their earlier position was that Nagaland is with India, but not within India. However, after this agreement, the government of India said that they have agreed to drop this demand of with India, but not within India, and they have agreed to come within the constitutional parameters of India. But of course, their demand for a separate flag and constitution is not acceptable to the government of India at present. So the government of India has, rather than carrying forward the agreement only with the Naga NSC and IM group, the government of India has also expanded the ambit of discussions with seven other insurgent groups, and also the civil society like the Naga Hovos and NGOs and so on. So the solution, friends, is at present the discussion is in a sort of stalemate, but because the demand for a separate flag and constitution for Nagaland is in no way acceptable to the government of India. So government of India is also discussing with other groups in the area, and the solution somewhere has to be found out in terms of giving maximum autonomy to the Naga inhabited areas, but without disturbing the state boundaries. But because if we disturb the boundary of one state, that state may not like it. Again, it may lead to some splinter group in that state which may start opposing that change in boundary. So without disturbing the interstate boundaries, we have to try to give the maximum autonomy to Nagas, and of course commerce connectivity in the Indo-Myanmar border, and helping the economy do well, maybe some sort of an economic package. These are things that we can think of, maybe more representation in the parliament. These are the things that we can that can probably help sort this dispute. Also, we can think of a pan-Naga Hoho. Hoho is an apex tribal body of the Naga. So it is basically a cultural body of the Naga. So this Hoho might have jurisdiction, or it might cover all the Naga inhabited areas in Assam or Arunachal and so on, but without disturbing the state boundaries. So these are the suggestions, friends, because this dispute has still not been resolved as of yet. Friends, now we move to the state of Manipur. I'm going one by one. I know it is slightly heavy on you, but once you understand the individual condition of insurgency in each of these states, it will be very easy for you to link in the next part of the class. So the next insurgency is about Manipur. Once you understand these 4 or 5 states, the next things will just follow from those things. So please pay attention here. Friends, Manipur was initially a princely state just after independence, and it was ruled by the Meitei kings. Meiteis are followers of Hinduism, and initially it had not acceded to India in 1947, but in 1949 there was a prospect of Burmese takeover of Manipur. So with this prospect, the king signed King Bodh Chandra of Manipur, he signed an agreement with the government of India, and he acceded to India in 1949. So Manipur, friends, the people of Manipur, or rather some of the people of Manipur, especially those based in the valley here, they were against this. They thought that this merger of Manipur is forced merger and not as per their will, and they are against this merger, and they want to go back to their earlier state of independence. So that is the chief cause of dispute, especially of this valley-based insurgent groups. They are against this perceived forced merger, and they want to go back to their earlier state of independence. So they want basically independence or secession. So Manipur acceded to India in 1949. A little bit about UT was formed in 1956, and state was formed in 1972. But UNLF group was formed in 1964, which pressed for the demand of their secession, or their the annulment of the document of accession of Manipur with India. So this group was formed, UNLF, and it started spearheading the agitation. A little bit about Manipur's geography would be very relevant here, friends. You see, Manipur is this is Imphal, and this is the valley. This is the Loktak Lake here. This is the valley, and this valley is only about 11% of the area of entire Manipur. But despite having a small area, it has about 60% of the population of this Manipur. And the most populous groups and the most dominant groups are the Meiteis of this region. They are almost 30 lakhs in population, and they are the most dominant groups of this region. And all these 4 sites, they are surrounded by hills. And the hills, the residents are mainly the Nagas and the Kukis. So the valley is dominated by the Meiteis, and the hills mainly have a population of the Nagas and the Kukis. So the valleys, the Meitei insurgent groups, as I have told, they want their independence, and moreover, even within these Meitei groups, they have mistrust and distrust among themselves and and with the groups, with the Naga groups and the Kuki groups in the Naga are basically in this northern region, more in the northern region because it's bordering Nagaland, and Kukis are slightly in the southern region. So with the Nagas and the Kukis, these groups, the Maiti groups are always constantly fighting with these groups, as well as with the government of India and the government of states. So it's both a horizontal fight as well as a vertical fight with the government, and the horizontal fight with their own other tribes. So, and in the valleys there is a fight insurgency by Maiti insurgent groups, and in the hills the fight is by Naga insurgent groups. As I have told, the Nagas, they want their merger with the greater Nagaland, and the Kukis, there are Kukis Naga inter-tribal clashes because both of them are living in these hills, and there are often clashes for their identity resources. There's always a trust deficit, suspicion, mistrust among these communities, and they always try to the other community. It appears to pose a threat to the existence of the other community. So it is true for all of these, most of these communities. So there are Naga Kuki inter-tribal clashes in these hills, apart from the Naga insurgency. Friends, Manipur is at present the most affected in terms of insurgency in the northeast. At present, it's the most affected. There are more than 42 insurgent groups in Manipur, of which 12 to 13 are currently active. The most important 4-5 groups, these are all valley-based insurgent groups. The People's Liberation Army, this is not the People's Liberation Army of China. It's a valley-based insurgent group which is active in Manipur, though the name is same. This is the People's Revolutionary Party of Kanglipak, Ripak, and this is the Kanglipak Communist Party. This is KYKL, and this is Kanglipak Yuval Kanna Loop, and this is the UNLF. UNLF is this one, United National Liberation Front, and these 4-5 valley-based groups, they ask for their demand is mainly secession, as you have seen. So at present, friends, because of the constant security forces operations, presently the insurgents are on a back foot here. A lot of militants have been neutralized, and many of them have tried to escape to Myanmar. This is an open border, as you have seen. As you may know, this is an open. There is no fencing on this border, but there is a free movement regime in which for 15 kilometers the residents can go without the need of any visa, visa and so. So sometimes the militants, when they are chased from here, they escape to Nagaland. But at present, even there is turmoil, so they're not able to do much in this area. So at present, the militants or the insurgent groups are on a back foot. But again, as I have told, even when they are in a back foot, they have the capacity to launch occasional attacks, like in Manipur, like a few days ago, or maybe a month or a couple of months ago, a commandant of Indian Army was killed. And killed along with his family members and 4 security guards. So these incidents keep happening, and the insurgent groups have also indulged, even if there is relatively they are on a back foot, but still they keep on indulging in extortion and kidnapping and occasional killing and violence and attacks upon the security forces. One of the important infrastructure project which is there in this area is the India-Myanmar Thailand trilateral highway, friends, and this is a 1360 kilometer long highway from this place called Moreh. Moreh is somewhere here on the India-Myanmar border, and from here all the way crossing Myanmar it goes to Thailand. So this is a 1360 kilometer road coming up, and after this road comes up, hopefully the integration or the connectivity of and it is a step in the direction of India's Act East policy. And once this highway is functional, it will bring more opportunities of export and in this area. It will help in the development of the economy of Manipur. Friends, these were the important states, Assam, Nagaland, and Manipur. I hope you have got some idea of the reasons and the present status of insurgency in these states. The rest of the states, it's relatively easier. Coming to Tripura, Tripura is a success story of controlled insurgency. The insurgency was there earlier because of migrants from East Pakistan and Bangladesh. A lot of people had come there, and it had reduced the indigenous tribals to a minority. For which reason, these 3-4 parties, Tripura National Volunteers, All Tripura Tiger Force, National Liberation Front of Tripura, these are the insurgent groups which were active then, but they have been gradually brought under gradually brought under control. And it is a much peaceful state at present. There was a recent agreement of the NLFT, National Liberation Front of Tripura, with the Tripura government, after which this they have also been controlled. That was in 2019, and at present there is no insurgency as such in Tripura. There is one important infrastructure project called in the Akhora-Agartala railway link. Akhora is in Bangladesh and Agartala is in Tripura, the capital. So a railway link is coming up there. So it will reduce the distance of Kolkata from Agartala via the Siliguri corridor from 600 kilometers to 550 kilometers to Bangladesh directly. And also it will bring the Agartala very close to the Chittagong port of Bangladesh, which will be within 66 kilometers. So friends, this infrastructure project is expected to, and this has been inaugurated this very year, and it will be very helpful in developing the economy of Tripura. Coming to Mizoram, friends, Mizoram also is a success story, because earlier in 1959 there was a famine in there was a ecological famine which happens every, say, 50 years or so. And so in 1959 this famine happened, and the response of the government of India was not up to the mark, as alleged by the Mizo National Front. And because of this poor government response, they launched an insurgent movement, which was a very violent movement. In 1966, they had almost taken over they had launched multiple attacks at various places in the state. But then, with the support of the Indian Army and Indian Air Force, that situation was brought under control. So after 20 years of that, a Mizo Accord was signed in 1986, after which Mizoram became a state in 1987, and the leader of this Mizo National Front, Mr. Laldenga, he became the first chief minister of Mizoram. And at present, it's a very peaceful state. Recently, there have been some disturbances on the Assam-Mizoram border, which I will come to later in the last part of the presentation. But at present, it's almost an insurgency-free state. At present, there's no insurgency. But as you know, there are so many tribes living in these states, and they have their own inter-tribal conflicts. That is there. There are suspicion also against the outsiders and non-tribals who are residents of those areas. So there's a constant atmosphere of suspicion and inter-tribal conflict. But as such, there is no insurgency worth its name in Mizoram at present. The Hamars and Brus, they are tribes of Mizoram, and Hamars are residents in the northern and northeastern part of Mizoram, and the Brus are residents of the western part. So in 1997, there was some clashes between the Brus and the residents of Mizoram. So the Brus, they had gone to the neighboring Tripura, and there they remained for a lot of time, say almost 25 years. And recently, last year or 2 years back, an agreement has been signed with the Brus. You will see that later. So these Hamars and Brus, which are also residents of Mizoram, they demand autonomous district council under the 6th schedule in Mizoram. At present, they are not covered under the ADC areas. There is one infrastructure project worth mentioning here, the Kaladan Multimodal Transport Project, which is a 2,900 crore project, and it gives an alternative shorter route from to Mizoram via the sea rather than through the Siliguri corridor. So it's also strategically important as an alternate route, but it will reduce the distance of Kolkata and Mizoram from 1,900 kilometers to almost 900 kilometers. So this project envisages that from the Kolkata port, the goods will be shipped to the Sitwe port of Myanmar, and from Sitwe it will follow the Kaladan River, and it will be transshipped to a smaller barges and ships, and it will follow the Kaladan River up to a point called Paletwa in Myanmar, and from Paletwa by road it will go to Mizoram. So that is the Kaladan multimodal transport project, friends, for connecting Mizoram with the sea and with Kolkata. As I mentioned, recently an agreement for the settlement of Brus has been signed in January 2020, and 34,000 Brus who are originally residents of Mizoram and they were displaced into Tripura. They were living there since 1997. They have been given certain safeguards like house. An agreement has been signed between the government of India, government of Tripura, and the Bru representatives, in which they have been allowed to settle permanently in Tripura and avail the facilities of the state government of Tripura. They are also additionally given some economic package like house, plot, some stipend for 2 or 3 years, and assistance for their livelihood and so on. So at present, this problem also has been, the issue of Bhu refugees also has been mitigated to a large extent. Coming to the state of Meghalaya, friends, Meghalaya is quite a peaceful state at present, but there are 2 or 3 groups like the GNLA, Garo National Liberation Army, which represents the interests of Garos, and their fight is for a sovereign Garo land. They want a separate country called Garo land. So this is a proscribed or banned group under the UAPA. This area, they are active in the western part of Meghalaya, and that is the Garo Hills area, and the hills is rich in coal resource. So sometimes they are also opposed to the mining of coal from that area, and they are trying to sometimes extort from the businessmen there. So this is one group. The other group is the HNLC, Inuit National Liberation Council, which tries to represent the Khasi Jaintia tribe of that area. I must mention here that these tribes are there, or many of the tribes are here, but sometimes these groups are just criminal enterprises, and on the name of the tribal group, on the name of protecting the tribal group, some of the group they just involve themselves in criminal activities on the pretext of protecting the interest of the group that they represent. So HNLC is a group which claims to represent the interest of Khasi Jaintia hill people, and their demand is to make the state Meghalaya only for the Khasi Jaintia people, and to reduce the dominance of the Garos in this in the state. So these groups are against, as I've told, this is for secession, this is for statehood. The other group, HNLC, and they are all protesting against the influx of migrants, resource exploitation, and so on. And as I've told, they are also indulging in extortion, drug trafficking, arms smuggling, and so on. This is all about Meghalaya, friends. Coming to Arunachal Pradesh, it is a very peaceful state, but there are certain tribes like Chakmas and Hajongs. Chakmas are Buddhist refugees from Bangladesh, erstwhile East Pakistan, and Hajongs are Hindu refugees. So they have moved to some areas of Arunachal Pradesh, and the local people of that area, there has been stress on resources. So the locals do not like it, and there are sometimes small disputes and clashes between these people, the Chakma and Hajong refugees, and the local inhabitants of Arunachal Pradesh. There are 2 things also worth mentioning, like ULFA Independent and NDFB-S. So NDFB-S has, of course, participated in the NDFB agreement. So ULFA is often trying to, when they have security forces acting against them, so they try to take the Arunachal Pradesh corridor to escape to Myanmar. So ULFA has been using some of the districts bordering Myanmar and bordering Assam to make a corridor for themselves to escape to Myanmar when security forces launch an operation against them in India. Also, the areas you see the areas in of Nagaland which borders, like this area. This is the area Tirap, Changlang, and Longdeng. These 3 districts are there in this region, and so this is a part of Arunachal Pradesh. So in these areas, the NSCN IM and the NSCN Khaplang, the Naga insurgent groups, they sometimes go and launch extortion or even training and so on in this area. So one is some of the groups which reside here in Assam, like ULFA Independent, they try to use this corridor for crossing over to Myanmar, and the other thing is that the insurgent groups in Nagaland, they try to increase their activities in the areas bordering Arunachal Pradesh, of the 3 districts called Tirap, Changlang, and Longdeng. And of course, they indulge in extortion, kidnapping, and so on, the NSCN IM. The last states, friends, the 8th state is Sikkim. Sikkim at present has no major conflict, and it's a very peaceful and beautiful state. So we have covered all the states of Northeast, and now we will go on to Inner Line Permit. Inner Line Permit is an official document issued by the state government. It was initially brought in by the 1873 Bengal Eastern Frontier Regulations. It was brought by the British to protect their commercial interests, because they had their trading interests in the Northeast, and to not allow outsiders for trading in that area, they brought this Inner Line Permit. But after independence, it was continued for protecting the area, for protecting the indigenous people of that area, and also as a measure of check against any kind of Chinese influence or any kind of outside influence, because these are bordering areas. So the government of India thought it wise to monitor the movement of people in this area. So for these two purposes, Inner Line Permit to continue to operate even after the independence. So recently, the CA 2019 Constitution, the Citizenship Amendment Act 2019, after this came, so there were some people who would have become citizens of India. So it was not like in those areas, ILP areas. So the people of the ILP areas, which is active in AP, Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Mizoram, and Manipur. This for Manipur is the latest entrant from 1/1/2020. So in these four states, ILP is active in a line permit. So you need a permit to go to some of the areas in these states. So, so the people of these states, they thought that more people will become citizens of India. People have come outside, so they protested. So after that, the government of India clarified that the CAA 2019 would not be applicable in 6 scheduled areas and the ILP areas. So after this declaration, Manipur became from 1/1/2020, it also implemented ILP in this area. Recently, there have been demands in Assam and Meghalaya also for implementation of ILP, but so far it has not been done. So friends, so far we have covered all the 7 northeastern states and the reason for insurgency, and even the inner line permit, which is there in force in the 4 states of Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Mizoram, and Manipur. These are all the bordering states with Myanmar. So now friends, that you have seen you have studied in detail the conflicts in the entire of Northeast in each of the states. Now we will sum up these things. Now we'll try to tie up the loose ends, and a picture will emerge from these things, from the discussion that we have already had. You will gather, friends, that there are 4 types of conflicts in the Northeast. The first one is the national conflicts, where there is a demand for a separate nation, like the Naga conflict, like the conflict with the GNLA, Garos, like the Kelo insurgency, and so on. So there are these national conflicts in which some tribal groups, they want a separate nation for their own, and some representatives of those tribal groups, they launch a violent movement, and while they launch a violent movement, they also indulge in crime, extortion, and they try to make a living for themselves through these criminal activities. And to increase their influence, they resort to killing. To increase their threat power, they resort to killing, so that their bargaining power and their threat perception will increase, which will help them in extorting more and more. So one of this is the national conflicts, which I have discussed: Nagaland, even Kelo, and so on, even the mighty insurgent groups in the Manipur Valley, and so on. The other is sub-regional conflicts, friends, where they want a state like the Garo Khasi tribes, like the Karbi Anglong, though it has been solved recently, like other areas which want a state or even an autonomous council under the 6th state. So these are some of the groups. Dimasas, they want a separate state for themselves. So these are some of the groups which want so there are those groups which want a separate nation, those groups which want a separate state, or even an autonomous council or more facilities for their tribes. So these 2 groups, they are those groups which keep on fighting with the government of India, keep launching attacks on the security forces, fight with the government of the state and the government of India, and so on. Then there are those groups which are those conflicts which are ethnic conflicts. The groups fight among themselves. These can be thought of as horizontal conflicts. So the Kukis, they keep on fighting with the Nagas in the hills. Even the valley-based insurgent groups, they keep launching attacks on the other Kukis and Nagas. So these groups among themselves, they feel threatened by the existence of the other group, and they keep on launching attacks and protecting their own turf, protecting their regional interests in that. So these are the ethnic conflicts amongst the groups in the Northeast. And the 4th group is purely criminal enterprises. They just want to do extortion, and for that, to increase their power, they resort to violence, they resort to killings, because when they resort to killing, the people will be afraid, and they'll be able to give money on demand. And a large number of groups, even of these categories, they indulge in the criminal activities like smuggling of arms, ammunition, attacks on security forces, kidnapping, extortion, and so on. So many of them are pure criminal enterprise, and some of them are these groups, and they also indulge in criminal activities. So the causes of insurgency, as you can gather, friends, now is the inter-ethnic mistrust and suspicion. Most of these groups are suspicious of each other. Most of the tribes and the groups that they claim to represent, they are suspicious of each other. And each of these groups, there have been armed groups claiming to represent the interest of each of these tribes, and they keep on fighting among themselves, fighting with the government of India, trying to ensure their dominance of the area and the resources. Then there is a protest against migration and control of resources. These groups have been protesting against the migration, which builds pressure on the resources and the control of resources by the outsiders, or so-called outsiders, or even the immigrants from other countries, neighboring countries. And then because of this, there have been demands for separate nation, or a separate state, or even an ADRC, separate autonomous district council under the 6th schedule, or even a regional council under the 6th schedule, or some extra facility for the groups that they claim to represent. And they indulge in violence, extortion, arms trafficking, narcotics trafficking, and so on. There is widespread underdevelopment and unemployment. Unemployment is one of the root causes of extremism, because if the youth is unemployed, if the youth are unemployed, and if some insurgent, they are more liable to get lured towards violent ideologies. And so, but if they're employed, the chances of going towards violence is less. So when they're unemployed, because of lack of opportunities, they tend to be misguided towards violent extremism. And the provisions of 6th schedule also have not been, it was basically designed for the development of the area, but they have so far not been very effective in bringing a lot of development in the area. So that is one of the reasons for the cause of insurgency in the area. Also, there is a widespread feeling of exploitation, alienation, and otherness. People of Northeast, or rather sometimes we in the mainland, are also sometimes talk loose about people in the Northeast, and it is sometimes projected that they are slightly different from, even if they ethnically it's different, but then there is some sort of otherness or alienation which is there in the minds of people of the Northeast for some reason. And then there is the AFPA is there. Recently, about 13 or 14 people civilians got killed because of AFPA, because of a botched up operation in which it was as per the government of India, it was a case of mistaken identity. So AFPA is there, and sometimes when when a person civilian dies, it leads to a lot of agitation in the valley. And the people of the states of the Northeast, they protest against the ASPA, and this ASPA, whenever a case of death, or sometimes even some violence against women, it happens, then it provides fire to the fuel to the already burning fire of insurgency in the Northeast. And here I must add the role of external states and non-state actors. China is a neighbor of the northeastern part of India, and Myanmar also is a neighbor. Earlier, the northeastern insurgent groups, they used to hide in Myanmar and China and Bangladesh, but of late, the government of Bangladesh has been very cooperative in handing over the insurgent groups and not allowing its soil to be used by the insurgent groups against India. And recently, the government of Myanmar also has launched several joint operations with India, and it also is helping the government of India in bringing, though there are still groups hiding there, but still, even if grudgingly, the government of Myanmar has been providing some assistance against the Northeast insurgent groups. But again, the role of China is there. Sometimes China provides moral material support in terms of weapons, in terms of training, in terms of safe haven, and so on to these groups. It has tried to use its security agencies or its intelligence agencies to bring coordination amongst the Indian insurgent groups, and it has also in the past tried to bring these all insurgent groups on one platform called UNLFW. So that has been the role of external states. So their role in promoting or in fanning the insurgency of this area cannot be totally denied. Now, friends, we come to the causes of underdevelopment in the Northeast. The causes, of course, is geographical terrain. The terrain is very difficult. You have seen the first slide. It's full of hills and interspersed with rivers and forests and so on. The other cause The other cause is the narrow Siliguri corridor, which is a very thin strip of land connecting the northeast with the mainland of India. And why I mentioned here is that it's a very strategic place. If something happens here, if it has a totally cascading effect on the entire of the northeast. So if this area there is some band or some accident, some disturbance in communication, it affects the entire of the northeast. So there is, and also this area is also affected by insurgency. Then one of the cause of underdevelopment is also insurgency, which is as well caused by underdevelopment. So it's a cyclic relationship. It's a vicious cycle. So insurgency, it retards the developmental growth. People are afraid to go in those areas where there are insurgents. So the developmental efforts of government, the government officers, or even the NGOs, it is diminished or retarded. Insurgents sometimes resort to blowing up of schools, of roads, of railway stations, railway tracks, and so on. So as such, developing infrastructure is very difficult in those areas. And on the top of it, the insurgents are sometimes involved in destruction of the infrastructure. So this is one of the causes of underdevelopment. Then the whole concept of outsider insider and the dislike for outsiders, it has created the prevailing insurgency, it has created an environment in which outsiders are afraid to go in that area. They're afraid to go and invest in the area. They're afraid to bring innovation, expertise, and initiative in the northeast. And less people are willing to, because there is a risk this threat to life, and it is being opposed by the insurgent groups there. So so outside capital, outside expertise is less available or less willing to go in the northeast. So this is also a cause of underdevelopment in the northeast. Moreover, this insurgency also damages the ecology. Northeast ecology is very fragile, though very rich, it is very fragile, and sometimes it results in destruction of forests. Forest conservation efforts are hampered, and so on. There are governance issues. Sometimes there are allegations of corruption, misgovernance, the benefits not reaching the poorest of the people, and so on. So there are governance issues also. And some of the challenges in tackling insurgency are, again, in underdevelopment, unemployment, ethnic diversity, because once you have an agreement with one of the groups, the other groups, they form a splinter group, or they have problems with the earlier agreement with a separate group. So ethnic diversity also is a problem in tackling the insurgency in that area in the northeast. And of course, the role of China I have mentioned, drug trafficking, arms trafficking I have mentioned, because many a time these insurgent groups, they are insurgent groups just for the in the garb of insurgency. They are involved in drug trafficking and arms trafficking and building a business for themselves. Also, many of the insurgent groups, the people there are heavily addicted to drugs and so on. So this is, again, many of the addicts, they have nothing to do, but probably the insurgent groups provide them some kind of a opportunity to make a living. So addiction also is a problem in the northeast, drug addiction, and sometimes because of this addiction also people are lured towards insurgency. And of course the role of AFSPA I have mentioned, because one civilian gets killed in AFSPA, one innocent civilian gets killed, and all of the government efforts is put back by 1 or 2 years. Friends, coming to the constitutional provisions for the development of Northeast, Article 244 and 275, these provide the 6th schedule status, and these 4 states, Assam, Mizoram, Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, and Mizoram. These 4 states enjoy the status of, have the provision of 6th schedule, and there are certain areas which are marked as autonomous district council. So this 6th schedule provides for autonomous district council and autonomous regional council in these areas. Presently, there are 10 ADCs, 3 in Assam, 3 in Mizoram, 3 in Meghalaya, and 1 in Tripura. Then there are the powers of DCRCs are like they have legislative power. They can make laws for the welfare of laws, keeping the tribal customs and culture in mind. They can make local laws. They can also try their petty civil and criminal cases. They have executive powers to develop infrastructure, and they have and so on. And also they have financial powers like to create district and regional funds. District in the case of ADCs and regional in the case of ARCs. Then they have the power to impose and collect land revenue, impose taxes. They have the power to share the mineral revenues with the state government. They have the power to regulate money lending and land alienation, or prevent land alienation. So these are the powers of the district and regional councils. But then let us see whether these powers have been sufficient to bring development in those areas. Friends, if we try to appraise the functioning of these ADCs, it is seen that at times the nominations to the district council, they are not very representative of the ethnic minority. There are sometimes candidates who are just put up there on the behalf of some other influential person. There is also nepotism and favoritism in the appointment of staff in the district councils. The judicial powers are not very effective because many of the courts have not been set up. Even when there are courts, the people who are entrusted with the judicial responsibilities, they may lack sufficient judicial knowledge and training. Also, the customary laws in those areas have not been yet codified. There are problems of insufficient fund, the taxes and royalty, state government and central government grants. They are sometimes insufficient to meet the aspirations of the people. Then again, the allegations of wasteful expenditure, financial impropriety, and so on. The schools that they set up, there are the issues of quality teachers availability. Also, sometimes the medium of instruction is not the local language, but probably the state language or even English, and this creates some kind of a discontent in the local people. So, friends, in short or in a nutshell, you can conclude that the benefits of the autonomous district council and regional councils have reached to the middle class or the new rich in those areas, but not to the actual poorest of the poor people in those areas. These are the constitutional provisions, friends. Now we come to the government efforts for the development of the Northeast. The Northeast has been granted the special category states. And what is the special category state? It is a state in which 30% of the gross budgetary allocation of the government of India is provided to those states. It includes Jammu and Kashmir, it includes Uttarakhand, the hill state, and also it includes the Northeast. Friends, the special category states, so 30% of the gross budgetary central allocation is earmarked for these special category states. And then in these states, the state contribution is only 10%, whereas in the other states, it's almost 60-40 or sometimes 70-30 or so on. So here, the state and central contribution is 10-90. The central and state contribution is 90:10 because the state resources are not that much. So the state is expected to contribute only 10%, and central will give the 90% of the contribution. Then there are concessions related to excise and customs duty in these states. Moreover, the funds which are allotted to in a particular year to these states under the SCS special category states, they do not lapse in the next financial year. Normally, on 31st of March, in a different state, the schemes lapse, and whatever money has not been expended, whatever allotted money has not been expended, it goes back to the government exchequer. But in these states, it carries forward to the next year. So the fund doesn't lapse in the special category states. Then some of the security-related initiatives are, there is a Northeast division in the Ministry of Home Affairs, which deals with the talks, negotiation, surrender, etc. of the insurgent groups. So currently, most of the groups in Assam, Nagaland, and Manipur, they are in suspension of operations, and they are in dialogue, except for one or two which I have mentioned. One of them is NSCN, which is the talks are in an advanced stage with NSCN IM, except for the two demands of constitution and flag, which are of course important points of discussion. And then ULFA is there, which is still active. So at present, the groups are on a back foot. The counterinsurgency operation is going on, and most of the groups are in government talks, except for one or two groups that I have mentioned. And some of the Manipur valley-based groups are also active, but again they are under pressure due to the counterinsurgency operations at present. Also, the central government deploys forces. AFSPA AFSPA becomes active in a particular area if it is declared a disturbed area by the central government or the state government. So AFSPA is there as a government effort, and then government also. This is SI means security-related expenditure, and so if the state government bears, the central government bears the expenditure incurred by the state government under this scheme, so it reimburses this amount to the state government. The central government also gives India Reserve battalions. It also goes for surrender come rehabilitation scheme of the surrendered militants, and the central government also provides funds for civic action of the central paramilitary forces or even the Assam Rifles, which are deployed in the Northeast. So there are funds provided for interacting with the civilians, maybe helping them in some of the local needs, holding medical camps, building good relations with the civilians. For that, civic action program is there. Some of the development related initiatives are the creation of the department or the ministry for the development of Northeast region, donor. And then there is the Northeast Council, which has its headquarters in Shillong, which is the overall body for the development of the integrated development of the Northeast. Then there is NERAMAC, which is an acronym for Northeast Regional Agricultural Marketing Corporation, NERAMAC, which relates with agriculture marketing. And then there is Northeast Handicraft and Handloom Development Council, and then there is Northeast Development Finance Corporation Limited. So this is sort of a microfinance organization. It provides consultancy and banking services to the willing groups or self-help groups in those areas. Then there is the Border Area Development Program, friends. Border Area Development Program is active in all the bordering districts in this Northeast, and there are funds earmarked under which infrastructure development programs are taking place in those bordering areas of the districts. There is also the Hill Area Development Program, which is active in the hill areas of the Northeast. India's Act East policy is also a step in that direction. The goal of Act East policy is to make the Northeast an integrated, is to increase the linkage of the Northeast with Southeast Asia, and so that the overall development of Northeast takes place. The government also is holding Northeast Business Summit to attract investment in the Northeast. So these are some of the steps that you can mention in the examination. Friends, now we discuss how far these efforts have been successful. So you see, friends, the insurgent activities in Northeast have seen a declining trend in the last 4 or 5 years. If you peruse the data, you will see that in the last 4 or 5 years, the number of violent incidents or the number of killing or death of security forces has decreased by almost 60 to 70% in the last 5-6 years, mainly because of sustained counterinsurgency operations by the security forces, including the Assam Rifles, including the Indian Army and the CRPF, and so on. Then recently, in 3-4 states, or rather in AFPA has been lifted from Tripura in 2015 and also from Meghalaya in 2018, except for some bordering areas with Assam. So in these 2 states, AFPA has been lifted. Recently, we have got support of Bangladesh and Myanmar against the insurgent groups in the Northeast. So this support is there. Also, you have seen, friends, these groups have signed ceasefire agreements and with the government of India in 2019. I mentioned that the National Liberation Front of Tripura signed an agreement in 2019. The Bodos signed an agreement in 2020. In 2021, the Karbi Anglong agreement was there. And the Naga talks are in an advanced stage and have told the status that it is pending for the discussion on the separate flag and constitution, which the government of India is not willing to accept. Despite these successes, friends, there is persistent underdevelopment in the Northeast, and insurgency is still there. They have although they are on a back foot, but sometimes they do launch killings of security forces and even of civilians, and of course the extortion, kidnapping, and it goes on. The insurgents try to run a parallel government in the areas that they control. It is our inability to provide gainful employment to the youth, since the youth have not been employed fully, so they give the opportunity to go into to get misguided into these violent extremist ideologies. And of course, despite all these developments, there is still a feeling of alienation and exploitation, for whatever reasons, persisting in the minds of the people of the Northeast. These are some of the suggestions, friends. The suggestions is that you have to have a holistic approach, keeping in mind the problems of the different ethnic groups. Friends, you have seen that when the government signs an agreement with one group, some group which is not covered in that agreement, it tries to launch another agitation, and then another problem is sorted. We have seen it twice in terms of the Bodoland agreement, and so while signing agreements, we have to keep the interest of different ethnic groups in mind. Of course, peace dialogue has to go on, suspension of operation has to go on, ceasefire has to go on, however temporary, but these still provide an opportunity to the development authorities to launch the government development programs so that people get the facilities of development. So these peace dialogue and suspension operations are welcome step. The CI operations should continue against those groups which do not come to dialogue within the framework of the Indian Constitution. But and these operations should be to that extent of bringing them to the dialogue table. But we have to have a human approach while launching CI operations, because if a civilian gets killed because of some lack of planning, or maybe a bad operation or something, it puts the people are the people, it creates resentment amongst the local people. Also, this resentment is exploited by the insurgent groups for more recruitment into the ranks, and also it relegates the peace process, or relegates the developmental process by a few years back. You have seen the recent incidents in TV and newspaper for the past about 1 month or so. Friends, the India-Myanmar border is not fenced. It's an unfenced border. There is the free movement regime on the border, in which for 15 kilometers on both the sides of the border, people can go freely without the need for visa. They have to have without the need for visa, but they have to have a certain document which is valid for 15 days, and so this is which is valid for which is in which 15 kilometers they can go on this side or that side, and this border is almost an open border. So this is used by insurgent groups from Indian side to cross, and also from that side to come back to India after some time. So this border is to be strictly guarded. Assam Rifles is there deployed on the border. And then also the India-Bangladesh border is totally fenced. 4096 kilometers is fenced, but there are certain gaps in the fencing through which sometimes the rebels, they slip in and out of the borders. So a vigil has to be maintained alongst the two international borders. Then again, developmental projects in the areas, they should be equal towards all the tribal groups and all the ethnic groups in the area. They should have social approval. They should be developed keeping in mind the local demands and the local customs in mind. Otherwise, if it doesn't come from ground up or from the lowest level up, sometimes the development schemes are just imposed from top without understanding the ground reality. So that has to be seen. And also the development schemes cannot ignore the ecology of the region, because ecology, if we ignore today, it will again lead to some problem later, because the people of the region are very much dependent on the local ecology for their survival. So any damage to the local ecology will reduce the resources, and people's livelihood will be affected, which may again result in disputes in the future. Friends, you can suggest for modernization of primary sectors like agriculture and allied processing industry, organic farming, rural development of rural infrastructure, tourism, bamboo based industries. Bamboo has recently been delisted from the forest in 2017. It was delisted as a tree, it was delisted from the forest. So bamboo outside forest areas, people can cut without any specific permission from the forest department, just to promote the bamboo based industry. So friends, we can think of statehood if required, because a lot of states have been created in India. But again, we have to see, we can go for statehood if it is administratively feasible. We can think of that. But again, there is a need for preserving the distinct identities. People of Northeast should not feel, or no community should feel, that it has been their interests have been subdued, or their interests have not been taken care of. Otherwise, this whole insurgency will not stop. There's also a need for decentralization. A lot of power needs to be given to the lowest levels, so that the needs of the local people are taken care of. And we need to strengthen the Panchayati Raj institutions, and we need to go for local resource generation, because no matter how much they ask resources from the central government and the state government, unless they are able to raise resources at the local level by means of tourism, by means of better agriculture, by means of agro-based industries and so on, unless this local resource generation takes place, the problem of unemployment and the problem of local level development will not be addressed. Of course, India's Act East policy is a step in the right direction, and we must think that preserving the distinct identities of Northeast people is very important, each of the tribes, and the whole term of bringing them to the mainstream is a misnomer, and there should be no mainstreaming, because all of these tribes have their different ethnic aspirations, and their demands, and all of these have to be kept in mind. Their separate identities has to be respected. Friends, this brings me to one of the hot topics today. There are only a few more slides left, so just bear with me for maybe 15-20 minutes more. AFSPA 1958. This was in news recently. So AFSPA has been brought. It was earlier brought in 1958 to tackle the Naga insurgency, as you have seen, friends. in the 1950s, the Naga insurgency was there. So to strengthen the arms of the security forces, ASPA was brought into force in 1958, and it is to assist the civilian forces, civilian agencies for the maintenance for an indefinite period. So armed forces and paramilitary forces are deployed for indefinite period under the ASPA, and ASPA is applicable only for the Northeast. There is a separate act called Armed Forces Jammu and Kashmir Special Powers Act, which was enacted in 1990, and also there was a separate ASPA for Punjab, which is a separate act which was enacted in 1983, but it got repealed, I think, in 1997. But this ASPA J&K continues. However, this ASPA 1958 is only for the Northeast. So you must understand this small difference, friends. And ASPA at present is applicable in. So initially it was applicable for the Naga Hill areas of Assam and 3 subdivisions of Manipur. But later it was also extended to Mizoram and Tripura. And the states were reorganized in 1972. After this reorganization in 1972, the Northeast states, it was renamed as Armed Forces Special Powers Act 1958. So at present it is enforced in Assam, Nagaland, the entire of Assam, the entire of Nagaland, Manipur, except the Imphal municipal area. So earlier there were protests in Manipur after the killing of T. Manorma Devi. So after that killing, there were protests, and the ASPA was withdrawn from the Imphal municipal area. But apart from Imphal, ASPA is there applicable in Manipur. The rest of the hill areas and valley areas, it is applicable. And in Arunachal Pradesh, it is applicable for 3 districts: the Tirap, Changlang, and Longdeng districts, which border Myanmar, and also in 2 police stations in Namsai district, which borders Assam. So in 3 districts and 2 police stations of Arunachal Pradesh, along with Assam, Manipur, and Nagaland, is applicable at present. ASPA was removed from Mizoram in 1987, from Tripura in 2015, and from Meghalaya in 2018, as we have also earlier seen, friends. So what are the features of ASPA? The features of ASPA is that government of India or the government of the state can disturb and can declare the ASPA is applicable to a state. It's a very short law, only about 1 page or so, given in the appendix of my book. So ASPA, the section 3 mentions that ASPA will be applicable in a particular area only after it has been declared a disturbed area. And who can declare? The governor of the state, or even the central government can declare the state as the area as a disturbed area. After which ASPA, and it continues for 6 months. Every 6 months it has to be reimposed. So ASPA covers the military, like the Indian Army, Air Force, the CAPF, and even the Assam Rifles, which are deployed in that area. It gives protection to these forces which are involved in the counterinsurgency operation in this area, in these areas. The important provisions are Section 3, which deals with disturbed areas, and Section 4, which is a very important section, which says that which allows the use of force even to the extent of causing death on mere suspicion. So if the non-commissioned officer of the forces, they suspect that this person, if he has a reasonable suspicion or that this person may be indulging in some illegal activity, he can use force even to the extent of causing death. He can arrest without warrant, search without warrant, and so on. Section 5 says that the arrestee has to be handed over to the nearest PS with least delay. Sometimes this delay with least delay, but sometimes this section at times is not followed, and it results in more delay before the insurgent is brought to the nearest, or before the arrestee is brought to the nearest police station. The most important section, or the most controversial section rather, is Section 6, which says that for anything done under this act, no prosecutions or suit or case shall lie against these officers of the forces except with the central government sanction. So if somebody is killed under ASPA, there shall be no case or no prosecution against anybody from the armed forces or the CAPF or the Assam Rifles and so on. So this is the provision which is along with Section 4. These are the provisions along with Section 4 and 6, which is protested by the people, that it gives immunity or blanket immunity to the security forces, even when some innocent person is killed, and it brings a lot of bad will, or rather a lot of people of Assam or people of Northeast do not like this provision of the act. So the AFSPA is opposed on these grounds: excessive and arbitrary power. You have seen mere on suspicion they can kill or fire or use power. Then also it disturbs federal structure because AFSPA, even the central government, though it is earlier it has been mandated that the consultation with state government is necessary, but the concurrence of state government is not necessary to for AFSPA to be enforced by the central government. So in a sort, it disturbs the federal structure. Despite being in operation for 6 decades, lasting peace has still not been brought in the Northeast. So that's one of the opposition to AFSPA. And UN also in 2020 said that the provisions of the act are against democratic principles, and it called for the repeal of AFSPA in 2012. Now, what are the arguments in support? The proponents of AFSPA are, or the especially the armed forces, they say that AFSPA will be deployed as a last resort to protect the country's territorial integrity and unity and integrity. And if their hands are not strengthened and their working conditions are very difficult at times, life and death situation is there, and these areas. So if the AFSPA is not there, unnecessarily the security force personnel will be involved in litigations, legal cases, harassment, and it will demoralize the armed forces personnel. And if AFSPA is lifted, the insurgent groups may get a free run in the area, and it may result in worsening of the situation. And it will say, take the situation, it will reduce all the gains that have been made in these years. So these are the arguments against AFSPA and also in support of AFSPA. Now, there are certain Supreme Court directives. The first one is Naga People's Movement for Human Rights. This case was of 1997, in which it said that the AFSPA is constitutionally valid. Consultation with the state government is desirable, though it has not been made. The concurrence of state government was not mentioned. Only the consultation was mentioned. Also, it mentioned that the section 4 and 5, which gives power to use force to produce with least possible delay before the police. These 4 powers are not arbitrary and unreasonable, and it cannot be misused. These powers should not be misused. And then it also laid down do's and don'ts guidelines for the armed forces who are working under the AFSPA. And it also had provisions for addressing the complaints of the people. It had a provision for looking into the complaints under this act. There was a BP Jeevan Reddy committee which was formed after the killing of T. Manorama Devi in 2004, and this committee recommended the repeal of AFSPA and insertion of Chapter 6A in UAPA. It said that AFSPA is a specific law. It's not a complete law. It only has certain provisions, but UAPA is a more complete law. It has both procedural as well as substantive aspects. It defines the crime and gives the procedure, whereas AFSPA is a very small law giving certain protection. So he recommended that a Chapter 6 should be added in UAPA for in place of, and the AFSPA should be repealed. The second ARC, however, the BP Jeevan Reddy committee report has been so far it has been rejected by the government of India, and the second ARC also had recommended for the repeal of AFSPA, and it also recommended for the insertion of Chapter 6A in the AFSPA. The only difference is that the second ARC said that the 6A chapter in UAPA should be applicable only to the Northeast. The most recent development, friends, is the Supreme Court judgment of 2016. In 2016, a huge number of families, almost 2,000 families, they formed a victims association, and they lodged a case in the Supreme Court, and they alleged that against the custodial death or against extrajudicial killings. So in that judgment, the Supreme Court has ended the immunity from prosecution under Section 6 of the AFSPA. So the immunity which said that nobody can be prosecuted without the central government sanction, that immunity has been ended, and armed forces have been asked to be answerable for the disproportionate use of force. And if the allegation of abuse of power is there, FIR has to be lodged against the concerned police officers or the concerned army officers. The army officers, and first the government of India in 2017, it filed a review petition before the Supreme Court against this judgment. And later also in 2018, the army also filed citing that their officers will be demotivated to work in those areas. But these arguments were dismissed by the Supreme Court, and as on date, the protection under Section 6 does not stand. And if there is allegation of misuse or abuse of power, the FIR against the armed forces personnel can be lodged. There was a SIT which was set up to probe these cases. The SIT was by CBI, and one army major in the past has been indicted in a case of custodial death or rather extrajudicial killing. which you call which is also called fake encounter, and over 100 Manipur police personnel have been indicted. Friends, we have now we come to the recent issues. Friends, we have already seen Karbi Anglong, a detailed discussion we have had. We will have a small discussion on Assam Mizoram border row. Nagaland civilian killings I have just mentioned, in which 13 civilians were killed, which led to a huge outcry against the AFSPA. And the Naga peace process I have dealt in detail, friends. Now, friends, we come to an important topic, that is the recent Assam-Mizoram border dispute. And Assam-Mizoram border, this is the Assam-Mizoram border. It is almost 165 kilometers long. And recently, on 26th of July, 6 Assam police personnel died in Lailapur on the border, near the border. This is Lailapur, and died in a fight with the Manipur police personnel, with the Mizoram police personnel. So earlier it was one Assam, it was only the state of Assam, and these Manipur and Tripura were princely states. And later, and this was the Lushai Hill district of Assam. Later, the Assam state got divided into Assam, Meghalaya, Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, and Mizoram. So these borders, these 5 states. So this Assam, the bordering districts here, are Mamit, Karimganj, Hailakandi, and Kachar. And on this side is Mamit, Kolasib, and Aizawl. So these are the bordering districts. So the dispute and the disputed tracks are between Lailapur and Varengte, that is somewhere here, and Karimganj and Mamit, that is somewhere here. So these are the 2 disputed stretches in which the root cause of dispute is that there is the notification called Bengal Eastern Frontier Regulations, 1873. Now this regulation defined the inner line permit, and in making this regulation, the Mizo chiefs were also consulted. So this regulation demarcated the boundary between Lushai Hills, that is this region, and the Kachar Hills, that is this region. So, the Mizoram bases its logic or its demand on the Bengal Eastern Frontier Regulations of 1873. And based on 1873, Mizoram claims 13. There is a reserve forest in this area. So this is the reserve forest. So Mizoram claims about more than 1,300 square kilometers of this reserve forest as its own territory, based on the delineation or based on the demarcation in the BEFR regulations 1873. However, Assam is unwilling to give this area because it relies its case on a 1933 notification, which defines the boundary between Lushai Hills and Manipur. Lushai Hills and Manipur, this region. So so Assam places its reliance on this notification, but the Mizoram's claim is that while this second notification was being made, the Mizo chiefs were not consulted, and so to address the issue, the Home Ministry intervened and a dialogue ensued between the Assam and Mizoram states. So later, at present, there is peace in the relative peace in the area, and what is needed is borders should be clearly demarcated. You can suggest that status quo should be maintained, satellite imagery should be made available for clear demarcation of the area. These are suggestions that you can give, and the paramilitary forces should be deployed in those areas to prevent any such flare up in the future. Interstate Council under Article 263 of the Constitution should also look into this aspect of solving the interstate border disputes. Encroachment should be removed from the forest areas. Encroachment on both the sides, both from Assam side and Mizoram side, should be removed because these encroachments are the root cause of dispute. Sometimes encroachment increase, and the other state police force and civilians, they come and attack those encroachments. So equal encroachment should be removed from both the sides. Both the sides should behave in a more restrained manner. Because sometimes the student groups and young groups, student groups, and so on, they give provocative slogans which is not liked by the other party, and this flares up the tensions. So at present, both the sides have retracted their forces, and at present the situation is peaceful. Friends, we just now see what are the questions in the last several year mains. I'll read those questions. The northeast region of India has been infested with insurgency for a very long time. Analyze the major reasons for the survival of armed insurgency in this region. You can start with the various number of tribes and their aspirations, the demand for separate nations, separate states, separate autonomous council. Then again, you can go on to discuss the inter-tribal conflicts and so on. Then the persisting unemployment, and lack of overall development. Then again, you can go on for other problems like the ASPA, when some innocent person is killed. You can go on and discuss the role of external states like China, earlier Myanmar, because the insurgents used to escape to Myanmar. You can also discuss about the geography of the area. So all these small points we just mentioned, I think it will make a comprehensive answer about 150 words. The second question was on ASPA. This was, I think, in 2015. Human rights activists constantly highlight the view that the Armed Forces Special Powers Act 1958 is a draconian act leading to the cases of human rights abuse by the security forces. What sections of ASPA are opposed by the activists? You see the sections are 4, 5, 6. 4, which gives arbitrary powers, or rather power to cause death, power to use force even to the extent of causing death on mere suspicion. And then section 6, which gives immunity to the police forces employed in that area. Though the Supreme Court judgment of 2016 has now allowed the filing of FIR and has removed the blanket immunity under section 6. So this question is probably prior to that judgment of Supreme Court is 2015. So critically evaluate the requirements with reference to the view held by the Apex Court. This Apex Court view was of the Naga case, in which they had mentioned that there will be SOP and ASPA's constitutional consultation of state with is necessary. This is, I think, this is about this 1997 case. However, in the 2016 case, the immunity on blanket immunity on lodging of any action against the security forces personnel was removed. So these are previous year questions, friends. Now we come to the last part of the lecture, friends. Just to sum up, we have studied about insurgency in various states and the causes and the current status. We have seen that at present there are two important groups which have still not been involved in dialogue. ULFA-I, which continues to sometimes be involved in insurgent activities, and NSC and Khaplang. NSC and IM is, of course, in talks with the government of India, but the talks are stuck on the point of separate constitution and separate flag. But the government of India has tried to rope in more groups, like 7 other insurgent groups and some civil society groups, to widen the ambit of discussion. So the framework agreement was in 2015, but as of now, this whole dispute has not been solved. Apart from this, so these are ULFA independent, NSC and Khaplang. There has been they are banned groups, and the security forces is conducting operations against them. The NSC and IM is in talks with the government, but the talks are held up for on the question of separate constitution and separate flag. There have been many agreements in the recent past. We have seen, friends, Tripura 2017, there has been an agreement. BRU 2020 and NDFB. NDFB, you have seen the agreement is there. Naga framework agreement is there, and the talks are in a peaceful. So you can see there is a general trend of resolving the disputes in the recent past. Insurgency is on the wane. If you compare the figure of last 4 or 5 years, you see that the number of violent incidents, and these figures you can get on the MHA website, so you can go through them. So you will see that the number of killing or the number of incidents, insurgent incidents, bomb blasts, and so on have reduced over the years. And at present, they have been decreased by, say, almost 60 to 70% in the last 4 or 5 years. ASPA, we have discussed thoroughly, but we have also discussed that any violation of ASPA or any misuse of ASPA results again in increasing insurgency or gives fuel to the fire of insurgency. And we have also discussed why ASPA is necessary. We have also discussed some of the developmental initiatives of the government of India and the government of the region, including the Blue East policy. And that brings to the end of the lecture, friends. Thank you very much. This is my address, waqars@gmail.com. I'll be very happy if you have any query or any suggestion or anything to suggest. I'll be very happy to have your comments on this email address. This is the book that I've written, friends. It has been published by Oxford University Press recently, and the book covers almost all of the topics that I've discussed here, except for some very recent topics, which I will add in the next edition. And that's about it. Thank you very much for the opportunity to meet to interact with my younger friends, and I hope they'll crack the exam. My best wishes are with them, and please work hard. Your efforts will not go wasted, and all your efforts will bear fruit. Just keep this thing in mind. Keep working hard. You never know how close you are to success when you give up. So just don't give up. Keep persisting, and success will be yours. With these words, friends, I thank you again very much, and I have mailed a copy of the PPT to Manasa. Manasa, if you want, you may circulate the PPT to the students if they wish. Thank you very much, friends.